everyone, and we've come to that question, how much? And that's going to be interesting because I'm going to be answering it from my perspective. How much is costing me? And I'm going to break that down into a few areas. How much it's going to cost me for the setup costs, how much it's going to cost me per month, and how much it could cost me on an annual basis. And that will change as we go through this whole video and to explain some of those aspects, because your circumstances will be different to mine. And that's what you have to bear in mind. Your setup costs will be different because the way in which you want to do overlanding, the way you want to go around the world, the way in which you want to fulfill your dream will be different to mine. So your setup costs will be different. Even your monthly costs will be different, because actually there are two of us, and that has an implication to where we want to go, how often we're going to be driving. All of those perspectives need to be considered, and I've got a figure for that. And then there's some monthly costs, and I've put them in because there are some costs that you have to bear in mind, that you have to budget for, which are not just living costs. I'll break that down a little bit as well. So let's have a little look and see what I've done for how much it cost me. You have to start with the vehicle, right? So what vehicle do you have? And what vehicle do we have? Well, that's a Ford Ranger truck. And when I purchased it, it was literally purchased brand new for this purpose. Started already, you'll see some of the pictures, see some of the build, and this is what we're doing for our truck. And those are the initial setup costs. So let's clarify with our dream, okay? So our dream will be to travel around the world. That's not going to take 5 minutes. That's going to take a long time. In fact, the longer you take it, the more expensive it's going to be. Obvious, right? We don't want to take our time because we want to be able to enjoy different experiences, and we just can't predict how long we will spend in certain areas. Because although we are planning to go into certain countries and we plan to see certain areas of each country, there are some things that we will not plan to do and spend more time in. Likewise, some areas that perhaps we will travel through very quickly. So some things are unknown as to how long we will spend, how many times we'll be traveling, how long in a day we'll be traveling, and so on. But our journey is to travel around the world. The costs this is what we will start with. This is what we pay out. We're not going to be paying this out every week, every month. It's just right at the beginning, and it's pretty hefty. You recognize, you pay it, and it's a sort of semi-investment, because in the future you'll get some of it back. There's depreciation, but you won't get all of it. But that is in crucial setup costs. And that's something that you have to consider for your journey and your dream and your overlanding. What are your setup costs? What's your budget? And you have to bear in mind that that setup cost is going to be recognized and balanced against your monthly payments or your annual payments, and how often you go and where you plan to go, and is it just weekends, or is it on a holiday basis every time you have a nice holiday break, or is it something you're going to do full time? Because those costs are going to be quite different if you start doing that. Okay, so now we have to start to consider what will be a monthly cost. Now, what I've done is I've started to look at breaking this down a little, because there are some costs which won't be monthly costs. What I'm talking about really is the living costs, how much it will cost to live. And the main needs for that will be food, fuel, and expenses. Now, expenses will be things like access to certain areas, access to certain sites, access to certain parks, maybe even campsites. So that is the daily living expenses, and that's what monthly expenses will be catered for. Now we look at the annual expenses, and when you start breaking up the annual expenses, you have to start thinking about what you will need to spend on an annual basis. There's lots of things like visas, le carnet de passage. Most of you will know that. So if you don't know what that is, it's basically a passport for the car. Now, bearing in mind that there are certain countries that expect you to have a carnet de passage. Some will be a temporary import. Others will be something slightly different. But essentially, you will need to do some sort of entry into certain countries. Now, this is where the research comes in, because if you've planned your route and you know what your vehicle is, go to a certain company that can provide you with a carnet de passage. Usually it's the automobile association associated with the country in which you live. Tell them, and you can say, this is my car, this is how old my car is, and this is the countries that I want to travel in, and this is my time period. So this year I'm going to be doing these countries with this vehicle, and they come and do a little overview of your vehicle, value your vehicle, and they say, this is how much your passport's going to cost for your car. And it's pretty hefty because some of the countries actually say this is how much you need to pay in order to bring your vehicle into our country. And the whole purpose of that is to be able to say, you're not just bringing it in to sell, you're bringing it in and you expect to take it back out again. So they do put quite a hefty charge on that. So sometimes that means that the deposit that you pay for your carte de passage has to cover that, because there is a certain document that is signed in your carte de passage will say that you've actually paid the amount that is viable for that country. And that's what we will have for us, a carte de passage for the countries that we will need to go in. Now, bearing in mind, your carte de passage is done on an annual basis, and that may change depending on the countries you plan to go in that year. So that's the implication of an annual cost. Other costs that you may need to consider are shipping costs. These costs can vary depending on how many times you want to ship across a sea or across an ocean, whether you're using a ferry or a roll-on, roll-off option. It will depend on what you plan to do for your vehicle as to how much it costs, because certain crossings, the longer the time takes, the bigger the distance, and obviously the costs are going to escalate based on that. So we've got some estimated costs for that as well. All right, so let's look at this again. You've got some setup costs, some monthly costs, you've got some annual costs, carte de passage, shipping, perhaps visas. And then you're going to think about perhaps emergencies and what you need to cover for that and allow for that. So how much would it actually cost us to spend a year from, let's say, January to December in that calendar year? How much would it cost us? And I've estimated to be, $35,000. Now that is a figure that I think will be for covering for our costs. Again, this comes with that caveat that basically says that's our experience, our plan, what we aim to do with our journey and our dream. And what you will do will change for you. Some of the little bits and pieces will be things like your monthly costs, the amount of food that you eat, how many of you are going on this journey. If you're on your own, your costs are down by half. If you're living by a budget, your costs can be quite less. Remember that each country has different types of food that's available and where they might be available and where you end up traveling within that country. So the kind of costs that you pay for your living costs on a monthly basis, that can vary. But here's why I've done it, is because if I've budgeted for these amounts of costs, and maybe this month it'll be less and this month it'll be more, but at least I know that I can make sure that I can cover for that cost. I can cover for that cost, and I can cover for that cost. And I've actually allowed that little bit extra. I actually think the budget that I've put on is too much. I don't think we'll need that. But what will happen is that I've covered for that extra bit of emergency. What if the car does need to have a certain repair done to it? What if there's a certain shipping cost that I didn't consider before then? And so there's a certain element of prepare for the unexpected.